Oh,
No.
Can you hear me? See
Yep.
me well?
I can hear you, Rumi.
Great, it worked.
I hope you're having a good day.
I am. I'm really excited for our conversation. Really looking forward to it.
Yes, just give me 1 second. Okay, we're good. Okay, I think that's good. All right. Rumi, just give me 1 second. I'm having some technical issues.
For sure,
Can
no
you
problem at all. No problem.
Okay, hi.
Hello.
I'm really excited for today's discussion.
I am too.
Fine?
I am too.
Okay, so are we ready to begin?
We are. I think so.
Okay, so welcome everyone to today's exciting discussion on the intersectionality of in love, law, and diversity. So Rumi, I'm really excited that we're having this discussion after a pretty big decision made by India's Supreme Court. And I have found it interesting because I'm finding a lot of parallels between India and the US. And I know the US just went through a similar struggle. And in 2015, the Supreme Court actually legalized or helped lift the ban of same-sex marriage within all 50 states. So it was a process within the US. So I think like the decision passed down by the Supreme Court of India is really interesting because it kind of pushed it back on the states.
Right.
So
right.
I'm really interested. So, but before we get into it, let's talk about you and me. So I am Alma Chopra. I am a disability activist and a life coach. And my story starts because I myself have a neurological condition. That's where my interest and my empathy for this topic has sprung up.
Right.
And that's why I'm in this field, and here I am today. Over to you, Rumi.
I think, first of all, I'm just very honored to be with Alma and get to know more about, a very important parallel movement that's going on, which is incredibly important for me as well. It was very recent when, I started also talking about disability rights and how important it was and the intersection of it to the LGBT movement as well. So it's rather an honor for me to learn more about it. I'll be honest that I am still very naive about a lot of things, but I'm here to learn. So I am Rumi. I go by the pronouns they and them. I am integrative mind coach and a human rights youth activist. The most of my life, I have been advocating for LGBT rights and, propagating about how to go beyond our identities while also loving our diverse identities and using it to empowering ourselves. And of course, my story is incredibly important for me, where I identify as queer, and my struggles have been around that as well. Growing up as a queer kid in India has been difficult, although I've had a lot of privilege at my home, and with the acceptance that I got. Still, I feel like I can use my privilege to give voice to a lot of other queer people who don't get that in their lives. So yeah, that's why it's important for me, and it would be very incomplete if I would only talk about queer rights because it affects me. That's what I believe. All of us should advocate for rights that really matter, and not just issues or issues or problems or causes that only affect us. So yeah, that's why both of these movements are really, really important for me. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I think we picked a great first of all topic because it's close to my heart, close to yours, and great timing because I think the movement in India just begun with this pretty monumental decision. I think there's going to be a rise of more, just like there was in the US, a rise of more, I would say, opposition and people standing up for their rights, in this case queer, but also in terms of disability rights.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about both of our movements. I think today's topic is geared more towards the current decision that was held down, but I think if we extrapolate it and look at it from the bigger lens, I think it's a bigger decision because when the Supreme Court bans down, strikes down, or kind of like throws their hands up and says we don't really want to deal with this right now, it goes to not only the queer rights, it goes to human rights, right? So like maybe it affects that community right now in particular, but it really has a rippling effect to all these kind of minority communities, right? Because it's kind of like, okay, that's the general gist of acceptance. Then what is like a minority disabled gonna face in terms of their rights or whatever other minority groups there are?
Definitely. And Alma, I think it also comes back to the entire view of how we see minority groups. It's kind of conditioned into us that we have to settle for what has been given to us and not ask for more. I think that's also a parallel that I see in both these movements of queer rights as well as disability rights, where when we ask for better infrastructure, when we ask for better rights, what we are said that be happy with what you have been given, because other people are still suffering.
Yeah.
So we are made to feel that what we have and be grateful to what we have and just make people feel comfortable with our true existence, and I think that's pretty unfair. Yeah, and that's what I see a lot, and that's what I felt with the recent verdict as well. When I felt like it really mattered for a lot of people. And although it's a long journey, a very important opportunity was there to kind of push this movement and bring a more inclusive environment in our country. And it's saddening, but I think it's a long way. Like you said, it's a long way to go. Yeah.
You just picked up a really interesting parallel that I never really thought about.
Yeah.
I think like you said, minority communities, they expect us to be happy whatever we're given.
True.
So in terms of accessibility, I'm seeing a lot of posting going on like about pro-accessible or like anti-ableism groups that are saying like disability rights is not, it's the norm, it's not a luxury. Accessibility should be the norm, it's not a luxury. And whether you look at public infrastructure, corporate, wherever you go, it's like when people, from my standpoint, when we ask for accommodations, it's like, really? Okay, now we have to think about it from this standpoint. How are we going to give this person accommodations, you know? So that's really interesting that you said that. Now, I was reading an article, Rumi, yesterday that I wanted to share with you, and it's very interesting. It talked about this topic, especially when it comes to love and like relationships.
Right.
It didn't talk about accessibility. That's why I said, you know, when you just brought that up, that was a very interesting perspective, because that is very true, you know. If there is no ramp, then a person who can't really walk has to figure out how to use the steps, right? Like me. If a person is on crutches, they have to like say 10 prayers before they use the stairs, hoping that they don't slip, you know? So it's we have to accommodate based on what we're given, when actually we should be given the accommodation without asking for it.
Absolutely.
So
Alma, I think I mean, you brought out a very important point where, and sorry for interrupting you, we'll go on to love, but I think this is very important how, you know, we think that these things are not fundamental to people. Accessibility or even love. You know, when I was fighting my battle of, you know, this want to get married, what messages that I got was this is a privilege. You know, you are fighting to get a privilege, and so be happy with that. Even with accessibility, with the conversations that I've had with my friends who work in the field, is they feel like these rights are not seen as fundamental. You know, just getting accessible washrooms or having ramps everywhere is not seen as fundamental. It's not seen as a fundamental right. Like marriage is not seen as a fundamental right that should be given to LGBT people. So I don't know, it was an interesting parallel that you brought as well. Just this idea that these things are not fundamental, and, you know, having to be happy with what is given to us. Yeah.
You know, that's really sad, because when I remember, so when we were going through like the bulk of this, I was living in the US,
right.
And I remember I'm not very acquainted with this topic, but very interesting. But I remember there was a difference between, I think, so let's talk about, so obviously we're for this, right? Same-sex marriage and these things, but let's talk about the opposition for a sec, right? So there's love, there's unions, you want to be with the person you love, you know, you want to spend your life with them. But I think one of the oppositions, when the Supreme Court, whether it's the US or India, when they shut us down, I think they come at it from an angle of constitutionality. So in the beginning, it was that same-sex marriage in this case is not constitutional. Why is it not constitutional, right? Men and women get together and can get married, but I think it's along the basis of the rights, like laws in terms of tax and inheritance and things like this. That's why I think the Supreme Court is against it. And then more narrowly, like tunnel-minded, I think in India, I think there's a lot more to do with Hinduism, religion, tradition, you know. And I think a lot of, I dare to say, politicians are not as open-minded as we want them to be, right? If we do have a stance on same-sex marriage, what is that going to say in terms of all the other minority groups that come up, right? And that's disabilities as part of that minority group, one of those minority groups. I think that's one. I think that's like one way they come at it in terms of opposition. I don't think it's like, oh, it's a weird idea. It's grotesque, and I don't want to think about it. I think it's more about the traditions and the legality of it. It's like opening a can of worms, right? And I think the governments are more like, oh well, if we allow this, what's gonna happen? Like I'll tell you, in the U.S., there was the first state that was legalized was in 2004, and interestingly, this is one of the first 13 colonies in the U.S. And like years later, right, 2015, that's when the Supreme Court lifted the ban of same-sex marriage in all states, right? And if you see the history, it was a very slow progression where states allowed same-sex marriage. If you see, some couples fled from their own state to states where it was legalized just so they could be with the person they love legally, right? And I kind of sort of anticipate that in India, meaning because I see a lot of parallels in terms of constitution and law. So I mean, we can pray for the best, but I see a lot of parallels, and I just wanted to bring that up because it's interesting.
For sure. I mean, the hope is always there. What you said about, the cultural aspect of it, politics and all of that. It just makes it harder. I also believe that, we haven't got to a point where everybody is talking about LGBT rights. And that's needed. Unfortunately, it's just needed. It's needed. And I also think that, and I wanted to talk about it also in an article that I'm writing, where I feel like the youth of India is not interested in getting into politics at all. And if we need a sustainable change, people who think as aligned to us need to be there to be able to have our voices in politics as well. But right now, with the entire milieu and, how politics is shown and how it is right now in India, the youth of India really feels unsafe to even enter that. So unless it's already safe, nobody would get in. And if nobody gets in, the entire movement won't be pushed. So I mean, it's a long journey. That's what I thought about it.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I'll tell you, I am glad that there is a shift in awareness. There is people talking about LGBTQ in terms of disability activism, and it's definitely needed, and it is coming, right? Globalization, that is something that is pushing the world really to communicate these issues, and it's actually helping awareness on these minority issues and other injustices, that are coming to light. So I think in terms of our discussion today, I think US had a battle for over 10 years. What is that? For 11 years, right? So from the time the first state got legalized to when it, like, all 50 got legalized, it's 11 years. And I think globalization does have something to do with it, because the awareness started shifting. The awareness in terms of, people standing up for their rights, what they felt injustice to.
Absolutely.
So I think that's changed. But I think India has a longer way to go, unfortunately, because there's a lot of emphasis here on tradition, right? On religion, what's right, what's not right, So I think that's another battle that maybe India has to face, that maybe the US didn't really have to face.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to get into the topic for today, which is love?
We should. I mean, that's my favorite topic.
Yeah, it's my favorite topic too, and it's where I live, right? If you live in love, it's hard to think from your mind.
Yeah.
But the first thing I want to touch upon is what you said, right, about accepting what you're given. So I want to read an excerpt from an article that I was given yesterday, and I think I want your opinion, and you kind of already gave me your opinion, but since you and I are coming from different sides of the, I think, of the same argument, but we're coming at it from different angles and different experiences, I thought it would be a good conversation.
Absolutely.
So the excerpt that I picked out is a familiar experience for the many women and queer persons with disabilities were interviewed, a sense of obligation to hold on to people who expressed a desire for them. In a country where sexuality and desire are rarely talked about, and where pleasure is believed to be the domain of able-bodied people, disabled people say they find themselves in the margins. What do you think about that?
Oof. I agree to that. I agree to that because I have had my own journey of love. And I think I can bring that in as a queer person, where as a female brown queer person in India, I just felt like desire for me was something which was not talked about, and I was not allowed. First of all, because of my body as a female person, and second, as a queer person. You know, desire was not seen as something which I was allowed. You know, and I think that goes a level beyond when we are also talking about disability. I can only talk about my experience where I feel like it's not talked about a lot. You know, we are not, again, with the Marriage Act and all of that, we are not given the right. And the entire desire or idea to want love and belongingness as well is also seen as something which is a privilege and not fundamental. And I mean, I think that's sad. And as coaches as well, I think we would agree to the fact that belongingness and love is incredibly important for living a good life, or just feeling good about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that is important. That is incredibly important. Even if you're not dating, let's say, keeping that side apart, even the sense of belongingness from a community which looks and speaks and you know, believes about the same thing, it's important to have that. And I think with rights being denied, we are also denied the right of belongingness. Belongingness to our partners, belongingness to a community that we really relate to. And that is really sad. And that just feels like it's an innate thing that is being stolen from us, and need to believe that that's how we have to live. So I think that's my perspective about it. And in our conversations earlier when we were discussing about it, I was very intrigued to know about you as well, what, you know, you felt about belongingness and love and desire as you quoted. And I'd be really intrigued to know what you feel about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think it's similar based on what I just read to you. The reason I picked out these excerpts that that I read one of them to you is because it totally resonates with me. I've talked to a lot of people with disabilities, and kind of when a counterpart, right, expresses love in this case for them, I think people with disabilities grab it because they feel like, oh, this is our only opportunity for, this may be our only chance for love, right? So I think it's a little bit different because there's no it's not really a legal question, it's more of an emotional question, right? But I think it's people with disabilities are obviously, I think, a little bit more apprehensive before displaying their emotions, right? Because when you express your emotions, in this case love, for someone, you can easily be rejected if you have a disability, because physically, emotionally, and a lot of stigmas that are related to people with disabilities, their inabilities, or maybe whatever it is. Like, I'll go on one tangent, and I'll give you one example. So when I was younger, I went to the NAF, which is a national organization on ataxia, and it was a fundraiser. So one of the guys who is very renowned, actually popular, he was conducting the ceremony, and to raise money, there was I forget the details of it, but it was like, if you donate X amount, I'll come and give you a kiss, right? And at that time, I never heard of this before. But that the idea was, people perceive that people with disabilities are very grimy, that they'll do anything for like that sexual arousal, which, it's more of an individual kind of experience. But I found that experience, when I heard that was kind of eye-opening for me, and it stuck with me, because I try to do everything now in my power to make sure I don't come off that way, So I mean, I think people with disabilities do have that stigma, and they hold on to when they feel that love from a partner. I think even if that's not what they really want or expect, or if that's not of their caliber, they'll still hold on to it, because they might think that, oh, this may be the only opportunity that I have, which is sad, because we're not living our potential.
Right.
Right. The other thing that I want to talk about really quickly, Rumi, is really interesting. It's very true that this country doesn't talk about sexuality and desires, and I just find that interesting to talk about, because it is very taboo, isn't it, to talk about sexuality or to talk about emotions or desire. But in India, isn't it true? Just find.
I mean, it's a banned topic, and definitely not with your family, which is like the same place where you should talk about sexuality. I think it's not allowed. Just that it's not allowed. Yeah. So I think it's sad, because we are also the second, the country which has the second largest population. So not that it doesn't happen, we are just not comfortable talking about it. So, and I just feel like then sexuality becomes something that we're scared of, or something that we are not proud of, because we don't talk about it that often. And I find it very problematic as well. So, yeah.
And why do you think that is, that we tend to stray away from topics such as sexuality?
Right. I think there's a cultural aspect to it, as far as I think and believe. I think how we grow up, sex or sexuality, pleasure, is not seen as religious or cultural. It's seen as something that we should refrain from, and that's also how religion is presented, I believe, because I have studied religion a lot. That's my second subject, literally, in life. And I nowhere felt that religion says that, this is something that you should ban in your life completely if you need to be pure. So I think that's how it's presented in our culture and in our religion. And if you go to temples that we have in India, Khajuraho and all of that, they have like legitimate, description, and it's visually presented. But I just feel like that's how it's been talked about. So I believe it's a cultural thing. Basically, conversation is not present within families. There's a generation gap between people, and we believe that we can't talk about sex, sexuality, desire with adults. So I think that's how it is. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I still think about it. I don't have a clear answer, but that's been my experience. It's culture, religion, the generation gap that we believe there is. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
agree
about it.
with I agree with you. So what's really interesting is so I agree with you. You know, I think it's cultural. You know, we come from a more traditional society, you know, living, you know, with extended families, you know, and you know, you don't want sex is like a ew kind of
Yeah,
topic, right? So, but on the other hand, like you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of um there's a lot of you have like the Kama Sutra and things like that, right? And it's like so there's you have like the linga, which is said to be, you know, sexualized kind of.
right.
So it's interesting that there is that dichotomy within the religion or within the culture, but it's still after, you know, the awareness is shifting, but I think it's interesting that that dichotomy exists, right?
Yeah,
And it really doesn't exist in any other religion or culture. And Hinduism is the oldest culture on the
yeah,
planet. But it's interesting that our culture is not yet there, right? So I find that interesting.
right. I think what you said brought out a really interesting point to me. Uh, what I think is happening is also that, you know, abled bodies are sexualized too much, and we see disabled bodies as not uh, as not okay to have sexuality and desire. So whenever we talk about like bodies and all of that, we're not comfortable talking about our bodies and how we feel in it. You know, definitely not parts that are sexualized. You know, we don't want to talk about sexual health at all, right? And I also feel that, I'm talking to my friends in the space as well, what they tell me is we are seen as somebody who doesn't have desire, you know, or doesn't
Mhm.
have the desire for love, sexuality, romance at all, because, you know, we are disabled. I don't understand that, because a human is a human, and a desire is a desire. That has to do nothing with, I believe, that has to do nothing with your identities as well. And you would be the expert to tell me that. So I put it.
You know, I'm sorry to cut you off, Rumi, but there is a wavelength thing here going. Have you read the article that I am giving you excerpts from? Everything I'm about to say, you are already touching upon. So the next topic that I wanted to touch upon was that pleasure is usually depicted between able-bodied persons. Right? You can say you can extend this to gay, right? Transgender, but
Absolutely.
no, you're right. You know, so it's not just like a legal issue, it's not just an emotional issue, it's a societal issue, right? How are we comfortable seeing love or our sexuality or things related to this topic? How do we like seeing it? It's between a man and a female, and not only a man and a female, but kind of an able-bodied or a person absent of a disability, male and female, and I think unfortunately, whether it's the youth, whether it's a slightly older population, that's where we get our standards from, right? So I think it's not just about the individual, it's also about the
Yeah,
communal thought and where that is, because we only react to that.
definitely, definitely. And I also believe that there's not enough to refer to. For example, I mean, you know, it has only been in the recent times that movies or other media has been open to covering such topics as LGBT love. For example, I have never seen a movie which represented. Oh, I have seen one, but other than that one movie, I've not seen love between people, you know, who are apart from able bodies. You don't have representation, so people can't even imagine that. And I think that creates a lot of discrepancy there, where we just like things that we can't think is wrong, or things that we haven't seen is something which is
right. Things that we can't fathom, because yes, there is something called imagination, but also, right, like a lot of books are made into movies. Why? Because, right? So a lot of what we're taught to think and feel and react is from media, right? And if media don't want to depict it, then either we're going to have no opinion or we're going to have a negative opinion. So I think, you know, if even though the awareness is shifting for individuals, I think there needs to be a culture shift. Just like there was a great post on LinkedIn that I reacted to about this disability. We can talk about corporates and accessibility and infrastructure, but on the bottom line, it's a culture shift, right? Until you and me, and until the general population doesn't recognize it and doesn't make a shift, our culture is not going to shift, because we are the ones that make up the culture, right? And that brings me back to your point. Let me go back to it. So the youth and politics, very valid point, right? Because you, since I moved to India, I'll tell you very honestly, I've been disturbed with politics. There's a lot of let me say this, there's a lot of politics within the politics here that make me really confused, right? You know, there's a lot of absence of that love that I like, you know, so there's a lot of non-straightforwardness, you know, that makes me confused. And I think that's why a lot of youth in India, they can't really they can't really vibe with it, because if you want to do something, there's so much. First, you have to make sure you have like a foot in the door, then you have to make sure you have money, then you have to make sure you have contacts, you know, there's just so much involved that if you want to make a difference, everyone steps back because either they don't have the contacts, or because they don't have the money, or because they don't want to get involved in maybe going to jail and things like that, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with that. I hope it changes, because youth is the only hope for me right now. And I hope these things also linger over to the education system that we have. Not sure if that's your next point, but I think it's really important to have, again, the representation. When we see a family in a textbook, and I think that happens in second standard, where you are taught what family is. I've seen books where it's very heterosexual, able-bodied representation. I've not yet, except some special books which are really expensive, seen books where, you know, there was a variety of representation that we had about family as well. You know, two mothers, two fathers, you know, parents with disability. That's never shown, because that makes people feel uncomfortable, and we don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But I think go beyond just living in our comfort zone as a society, and really reaching out to things that make us feel uncomfortable and really talking about it. So yeah, I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I think once that shift is there, I think you know, like education, media, I think once like the youth, right? Because that's really the next people to kind of take our societies forward. And once they get involved, because they have been brought up or brought into a more open mind, right? I think there will be a more of an awareness, more of an opening, more of more of, and I think it'll be more accepted to talk about these more, I guess, not talked about topics, right? Two mothers, two fathers, disabled mother, interracial, right? Let's start with interracial, right? That was huge, you know, Caucasian marrying someone of a different color. That was not accepted at all, you know. And I know the U.S., because that's more of a melting pot. That was a huge battle for us, you know. But you know, it took time, and finally, you know, now it's another battle. But I think, Rumi, in terms of this battle, I think there is a battle, but I think you will win, right? It's just a matter of time. And if you guys can stay with it, eventually that understanding, the acceptance, it will come around, because it's coming in the entire world. It's coming in globalization. There's no way that the damn trap can be lifted in one part of the world and it stays shut in the other, right? India is a democracy, and once the people accept this, and once the youth, as they rise and grow older, they bring about awareness, the education, media, what have you, that all will change.
Hopefully. That's my hope as well.
Yeah, that will change, and it's something that we all can look forward to.
Definitely.
And then I want to talk about, like you mentioned, I know disabled women or men, and you can give me your experience as a queer, but it was something that you touched upon, right? Because it is so ill represented in the media. It's not talked about. It is taboo. It's kind of grotesque, right? People like with disabilities are looked at as being asexual, not having the capacity for that desire, that emotion, right? And let's talk about that, because I know that it's not really talked about subject, and it's kind of a subject that makes people uncomfortable. But I'm all for uncomfortable subjects, so let's go at it.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little opposite for queer people. People see queer people as absolutely sexual. In fact, a lot of our identities are over-sexualized. Especially in the start, just a couple of years back, I think, you know, there were representation in the media where LGBT people were shown as extremely sexual or even abusers. And that was really problematic. And a lot of people called out, you know, this problem of representing queer people as sexual. But that was the majority view that a lot of people held. And I think that's still lingering, where, you know, LGBT people are seen as absolutely, you know, absolutely sexual. I think that's just sexualized a lot. As well as on the opposite side, you know, people who live with disabilities are seen as asexual. And I think it's just sad, because there can be intersections. And I think that's where we come back to our topic, where yes, there can be people who are queer as well as disabled. There can be people who are asexual and also are living with a disability. But just this idea of disability and asexuality being parallel, I think it invisibilized a lot of people who also identified as queer. That was what my experience was. And I think it stays, and that's where all of us need to talk about sexuality more and love. I also wanted to bring this topic of safety, you know, in our conversation. Now that we're talking about it, I believe in a society like this, it's not safe to love. For me, it's not safe to love the person that I love. You know, when I was in a relationship, which I recently broke up from, it was hard. It was incredibly hard to to make people accept my relationship, or just, or just the process of coming out, or just the process of expressing love in open. It's incredibly unsafe for queer people. And I know very little about how it is for people with disability, and I think I would pass it on to you, where I would want to know how it is for people with disability, and just the idea of how people look at you, or how you feel expressing love when you are out in the society. I think that's where I'm intrigued to know more about.
Okay. So first, let's get one thing straight. I don't give a damn about what people think. Okay, but that's me.
Beautiful.
So but I think there is a kind of a hesitation when people with disabilities do express their love for each other. Now, there are a lot of times, when people with different abilities, they do hook up and they find love within themselves. But in terms of how others perceive them, I think that's the game changer, right? It's like self-confidence versus self-esteem, right? The self-esteem involves the perception, and that's where it declines, right? So I think there's a strong, right now, I think there's, when I came to India, I sensed like there was, you can have a relationship between caste, and then there's like light color now, and there's dark color now, and then there's like issues of sexuality, and then there's issue like the lesbian gay community. There are a lot of taboos, right? So I think when a person with a different ability is in a relationship, I think it's more like, okay, we're in a relationship, let's hang on to it. But when we go out, like personally, as I guess I can't tell you from a relationship standpoint, but from like me being single, when I go out, I'm like, okay, how am I gonna move from here to here? If there are steps, what is my next move gonna be? I have to plan and think all of that out. And then when you're with a partner, you have to double think about it, right? If your partner is also differently abled, you have to think how you're going to move together. And if your partner is not differently able, you have to think, depending on where you are in the relationship, you have to think about, okay, if I ask him or her to help me, for example, cut my food, or help me pick something up that I dropped off the table, or help me into the car, or what have you, how will they react, right? Then it's not how will they react, then it's also, okay, when the general public sees us, how will they react, right? So I know coming from my community, there's a lot to think about, right? And it sounds like there's a little bit less from your community, but it's still something to think about, right?
Yes.
It's still a taboo, something that we have to think about more than your regular Joe and Jane have to think about, right?
Interesting.
So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's what that's what coming up to me, that a lot of times, of course, our identities make it different for us in terms of relationships and love. But I think if there's support from the society, it makes it easier. But also the fact that love in itself is as same for us as anybody else. I think that's very important to bring, where a lot of people think that, oh, love is going to be very different for people who are queer or people who live with disability. Something that I would want to bring up here is love is love, and love is very similar for all of us, like it is for every other person. It's just, for me, it is how the society sees my love. For a lot of people with disability, it becomes the entire dynamic in the relationship that makes it different. But I think apart from that, it's just love. So yeah, just wanted to bring a little message here. Yeah,
No,
go forward.
I want to touch upon that too, guys. That's a great something great that you just touched upon. Quick question though, are you sure that you and I are not reading the same article?
I didn't read any article before coming here. I promise. I promise.
Okay, so yeah, so the article touched upon this too, and right, love is love, right? So I think the problem in terms of the disability community, when you're differently able, there may be more physical needs, like in terms of me, but right, there are also mental needs as well. So there's also an aspect, okay, well, love can't be really just love, you know, the way people usually define it, because especially in the differently abled community, there's a component of caretaking involved in the relationship, right? And so how does that kind of define love as the same as, you know, love depicted between a man and a woman in movies? Now, my response to that is that in every relationship, right, queer, disabled, heterosexual, whatever it is, between the partners, there is and there should be a certain understanding, you know? And every relationship, there's a give and take. I think, you know, once that understanding is built, when that connection is built, that communication is built, there's, you know, if for example, if I was in a relationship with a man, there are certain things that, even though I'm physically differently abled, there may be things that I can do better than him.
For sure.
You know, that I have to compensate to him for him, right? And obviously, he's gonna have to compensate for me in terms of physicalities, right? But there's always a give and take. Now, even if you look at your regular heterosexual relationship, even if maybe someone's more sexual than the other, maybe someone's more intellectual than the other, maybe someone needs more emotional support than the other, right? So, like, whether it's a queer community or the differently abled community, you can't just say, in our case, you can't just say that, oh, they have physical needs, so it can't be an equal relationship. Every relationship, whether it's even between friends, is always give and take, right? For whatever it is. And that's why, to go off on a tangent again, that's why I have such a hard time with the word disabled, because you can't tell me I'm disabled, because I'm so much better than, well, not me, but I'm so much better than you with so many other things, right? That you're discounting by saying I'm disabled.
Yeah.
So I think that was a great point. And I think the topics that we discussed today, we can discuss, you know, for so much longer, and for, you know, because they're so interesting. And I think just the topic of same-sex marriages is just a very interesting human rights topic. And I think once we have some sort of green light that this is being accepted, I think that it's a huge step for human rights, because that's acknowledging that people are different, and that's okay, and we can accommodate you in our legal structure.
Absolutely. And I think with both the movements, it's more about really accepting that we exist, rather than just tolerating us or accommodating us, because we exist. We are there in the society, and we occupy a space that we deserve totally. And I think there's where the line is, where I think right now both the communities are tolerated, not accepted, and we are seen as somebody, you know, who you have to give rights, or who you have to give accessibility, not as somebody who exists and whose fundamental right is to have the basic rights, is to have accessible washroom, is to have gender neutral washrooms, you know, So I think that's where I'm at, where I feel that society is still tolerating us than wholeheartedly accepting us and understanding that we exist and we contribute to the society, to the government as much as everybody else does.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, that's
I agree with you. On a positive note, I'll say that that's why we have people like you and me, right? Activists bringing awareness to these issues. But I think to give you some positivity, I think we're gonna get there.
right.
You know, so just stay steadfast and just continue your work towards bringing awareness, because the ultimately the shift is going to come from us. The shift is going to come from the ground. People say, oh, I'm one person, what's it going to matter? But India is a democracy. That's where it begins. It begins with us. We're one person and we can make a multitude, right? So if we want to make a shift, just Rumi, stay steadfast, do what you do. I'll do what I do. We'll bring awareness, and we're gonna bring a change.
Definitely, Alma. And I think as we move towards the end, I believe I want to include that I'm incredibly inspired by how you present your views and all of that. And I think from you, I would want to learn, and I think all of the viewers could learn. What would you want to say about rising powerfully in our identities and making our voices heard? I think, yeah, I would want to know what you have to say about it, and a lot of people will benefit from that.
I think it's just a matter of being who you are, which is something I advocate, and I know you do as well, right? It's you're and not just who you are, right? Everyone is who they are, right? But really authentically, really knowing who you are, which involves things I know you're involved in, like spirituality, right? No, and I'm involved in as well. No, self introspective practices, meditation, things, and just knowing who you are. Because right now, what I feel, regardless of where I am in the world, people are picking up their identities and definitions of how to think and what they like from the outside, from friends, from media, from news, right? And this is not really how it should be, right? You should know who you are. You should know what you want. You should know what you like, right? Instead of being told, okay, this is not depicted and people don't talk about this, therefore I don't like it either, right? You should say, regardless, you should be proud of who you are.
Yeah. To that, Alma, I would put another question, and I'm genuinely interested. I know we have crossed the time, but still, I'm intrigued. I think for a lot of people with different identities, it just becomes more difficult. This entire self growth and self introspection journey, and all of us have to take. But I think for a lot of people, in our movements, it becomes incredibly hard to accept our identities and know that we are beyond our identities as well. I always say in my work that, regardless of what your other identities are, it's important to understand what you're beyond that. Even with trauma work, what are you beyond your trauma? And I think I would want to ask that to you as well. How can we actually create? And it's a larger question, but how can we actually create that love, accepting our identity and also going beyond that? How do we do that? Because it gets incredibly difficult where the society is not supporting you internally. You don't feel good about yourself. So how do you actually go about with it? Yeah.
Let me talk from personal experience, because I definitely had to go through that, and I think in a space now where I have turned the tables and I can give back to the community, which is what I'm trying to do. But I think it comes from inner strength mostly, right? I was, as a child, I was very extroverted, very social, and I was diagnosed, and it was kind of a game changer, right? To be diagnosed, and a big bummer. But I was looking back, it was a blessing in disguise because of my diagnosis, I was able to kind of put up the walls, right? Which is not a great thing to do, but I put up the walls, became more introverted. Thereby, I was able to work through like the negative experiences, the traumas that I definitely had, and I was able to overcome that. I realized who I was, right? It took time for me to understand who I was and to be okay with, okay, maybe I can't do this, but I can do this, right? So like if you just go out and just watch movies and hang out with friends, that's great, but that doesn't give you your uniqueness. That doesn't tell you who you are. You need to spend some time alone to know who you are, right? And in that time alone, that's when you build up your strength.
Yeah.
That's when you're like, you shut everything out, shut everything down, and you're like, okay, this is who I am, and this is what I want. I want a peanut butter sandwich. I'm not okay with the jelly sandwich, right? With your friends, you might be okay with the jelly sandwich, but that's why you sit alone, because that's when your voice becomes loud and say, okay, I'm gonna only settle for a peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's the power of self-care, self-value. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. Love that. Love that.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing it up for me. So if I turn the tables and I ask you the same question, because you're also a very strong person, a little bit younger than me actually, and you're very strong also in terms of what you do. So you tell us, enlighten us, how do you find your voice?
Wow. First of all, I feel flattered by what you said, and it definitely means a lot. How I do that, I think it was hard for me as well. Growing up, I was definitely bullied for my identity, and at that point, I couldn't find the voice. But I think a day came where I just realized that I didn't want to live a life where I couldn't speak up for what I really believed in, and that were the values of love. And then that's why even my Insta ID with Love Rumi, it's very intentional, where everything for me, is about love. And I think that's where I come from, where I realized that I really wanted to make my voice heard, really talk about what mattered, and just went for it. And then thought about it later, and then thought about, and got into my feeling of fear, of insecurity. I just went for it. I just went for the action, and then started thinking about it. And I think that just really made me realize that all of us actually, have these purposeful messages that only we can impart to the world. And that is something that I keep reminding myself, that, Rumi, you do have a very important, essence that only you can give to the world. And that really helps me to just keep me going. And definitely that time I find that spaces in my day and in my schedule where I take 10 days off, go to a retreat, not talk to anybody. I don't have my phone by my side, and the world shuts off. And then I kind of shed layers of myself, of my fears, of my insecurity, and I want to be true that even as a coach, I have all of them. I have those insecurities, I have those fears. There are times where I fall back and I don't follow my own values or own interventions that I do with my own client. But I think that's my vulnerability and strength, that I acknowledge that there are spaces where I'm struggling, and still acknowledging that, holding my voice really strongly. And I think that's about it. We continue doing that and keep continuing finding communities, and deserve to feel belonged to people like you, and people like the communities that we have. So I think that's about it.
So for the people viewing or listening, one parallel that I just took from Rumi is that she also takes time to, as she said, shed her layers. So that time for introspection is really needed. Whether you want to call it self-care or whether you want to call it vacationing, that time is important for yourself to know who you are. And not just define yourself by what people say you are, how people react. And it just got so I think that's something that people can definitely take away from our discussion today. If you're struggling to find out who you are, and if you want to be stronger in terms of finding your voice, so we take away what Rumi and I just said we both went through, which is taking time out where we not necessarily build our walls, but we take time out from society that bombards us with norms and definitions. So we have time to define ourselves.
Absolutely. Beautifully put, Alma. Beautifully put. Totally agree to that. Yeah.
So,
I thank our listeners for joining. I hope everyone took away something from this discussion. Very interesting and pivotal discussion, actually. And Rumi, thank you so much for shining light on so many issues, relevant issues, actually. And you said you're honored. I am truly honored to talk to you today.
It was very. I learned so much. And just sharing this space with such a receptive person like you, it was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Rumi. And I'm looking forward to many future interesting stuff from you, activism, and interesting talks with you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Totally.
Yes.
Great.
All right.
Great.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Take care and bye, Alma.
Yes. Take care. Good night.